Well, hello, hello. Or, hello there. Let's see, not too many people here. Not nearly as popular as watching the final arc, apparently. Well, at least there's a couple of you. I mean, that'll probably make it a much shorter stream, as I was hoping to do some Q&A for part of this as well, but maybe some more people will show up now that it's actually gone live. We'll see what we see. Okay. So, today's video, I was just planning to go do a bit of a retrospective, talk about the series as a whole. I'm also planning on, I've got 2 more Clone Wars videos that are probably going to come out. So one will go ahead and come out tomorrow afternoon. That'll be the normal video format for the final arc. And then I'm going to go ahead and do Crystal Crisis a week from Monday. So I've got both of those coming up. And hey, today, let's go ahead and talk about the series as a whole. So, it's been a long road getting to here. Dang, started this up months and months and months ago. And heck, over 20 videos. It's at all the way back at the beginning, starting up with, well, roughly speaking, starting up with the movie, because being that I was watching in chronological order, I actually went ahead and started up with Cat and Mouse and then The Hidden Enemy first. And when it comes to it, I definitely think it was better that I started it up that way, because with the quality of the movie and season 1, at least having started in chronological order means I got a bit of a taste for what later seasons would end up being like later on, rather than just having the movie to start that up with. So I think that was definitely a good thing. I had no idea for sure when I first started it as to whether I was making the right call or whether I should have actually gone ahead and watched it in the release order. So yeah, I'm happy with how that went. I'm happy that Christophsis arc I didn't end up breaking out. Otherwise, what it would have been the beginning of the movie, at the very beginning, then middle of season 1, and then middle of season 2. And I just don't think it would have had the same impact if I had gone ahead and done that. So getting to look back, definitely I'm happy that I went about that the way I did. I will say, when it comes to the piece with Fives, Echo, and Heavy, though, I don't know that having watched it, at least in the chronological order I did, was the best chronological order I could have gone ahead and watched it in. Just because Clone Cadets got shoved off way by itself way early in my watch, and then had to wait a while for the other pieces that followed up. So, that one, yeah, I've got to go, check out some other potential orders, because I remember hearing that there were other ways to watch it too, other than just the main chronological and the release order, of course. Some that tried to organize it a little better that probably would have fixed things like that. But anyway, season 1, looking back, in my own memory of it, it's like, man, the show has come so very far since season 1. Heck, my favorite arcs really in season 1, well, my favorite arc was the last arc in there, and then the other best piece in there was probably, talking, say, the Dooku captured area. But that Ryloth arc, even there, that Ryloth arc, the quality of it is probably only on par with some of the weakest stuff in the final few seasons for me. And if the quality of the visuals and the performances, etc., had been better, it would have gone up a little more. But even then, it's just the writing as well took a huge change over the course of the show. And I remember multiple times being heavily impressed with the visuals and the changes as the show went on. And hey, we've got 6 people in here now. So I've got a few more. Hello. Well, hello there. So, yeah, I said that's, just thinking back on season 1, and I mean, dang, there were so many episodes that if I'm going to watch again, I think you could skip without too much difficulty in there. Oh, man. My least favorite episode of the entire series is in season 1. That's Bombad Jedi right there. Oh, oh, man. Hate that one with a passion. Yeah, I even when I did the video that covered that portion, I skipped over that one so quickly just because I really, really didn't feel like talking about it. And then, oh, the other one, the Blue Shadow virus arc. Oh, that was painful too. The other interesting thing, talking back, thinking about season 1, is how I covered Clone Wars way back then. Heck, I did all of season 1 in 2 videos. I think I did the same with season 2. Whereas you get later, I'm doing 4 episodes in a video as opposed to 10. And it's a reflection of a few things. First off, it's a reflection of the fact that the show was getting a heck of a lot better, and I like talking more about things I really enjoy, and so there's that. And also just the response of all of you and how much you were enjoying what I was doing. So that went ahead and led to me wanting to go ahead and keep making these and putting the time and effort into, well, what it takes to make a big, long video. Yeah. But my notes even changed too. I have very short notes on the early stuff, and my notes later on get so much longer. Heck, when I first watched things like Cat and Mouse, The Hidden Enemy, the movie, I took all of the notes I made for those completely afterward, which is not how I did most of the show. Most of the show, I took my notes during the course of the episode, sometimes pausing to go ahead and do it. And sometimes when things would get really good, I would just put a little time, that I wanted to come back to. So there's 5 minutes and 40. I need to come back there because there's something I need to write about later, but I just can't give it the attention to go deal with it right now. And so, yeah, that definitely how I went about going through it, and I got better at it as it went, which I suppose is hardly a surprise. You get better at most things as you go. Hey, we got 7 people in here. One more. And then, yeah, we just keep going. So talk about my favorite arcs. Now, no one's going to be surprised. I can say right off the top what my favorite arc is, and anybody who was watching the live stream last week already knows the answer anyway. Siege of Mandalore easily blew me away. Easily the best arc of the entire series. Now, as for probably what would be my next favorite arcs, so I'm going to go with the Ahsoka arc at the end of season 5 as my second favorite arc. I just love that one. I thought it fired so well all the way through. And maybe I should be doing this as a countdown in the opposite order, but hey, you've been around. We're going to go downward from 1 through, let's say, 5. And then here, the one that gives me, a bit more trick, though, is really comparing that 5's arc with the Umbara arc. Because both of those, I love them so much. Ultimately, I think I'm going to go ahead and give it to the 5's arc. And that's just because there's a little more consistency to the 5's arc all the way through. Although I think the Umbara arc reached higher heights than the 5's arc did at its peak. That last episode of the Umbara arc, whew, dang. I think that one was probably better than any of the individual episodes within the 5's arc. But, yeah, because of that, 5's arc will go ahead and be my third favorite arc. Umbara arc for my fourth. And I've got to say, if that Darth Maul Son of Dathomir comic was actually made into an arc, an actual full arc, it probably would be right there around number 5 for me. But it never got made into it, so, well, it's irrelevant now, isn't it? So without that, now I'm probably going to go ahead and go with something like, say, probably the Bad Batch arc. Now, I may be more alone in putting the Bad Batch arc up that high, but as I said, I really enjoyed it. I thought it fired well. So, uh, beyond that, we start jumping into some of the Night Sisters arcs that were in the show that were really good. The Maul and Death Watch arc. And yeah, there were a number of good arcs over the course of the show. And then there were some that really, really stunk. Now, an interesting thing in just talking about the arcs that stunk, pretty much when I'm talking about the best arcs, they're all 4-episode arcs. And in some cases, then you get into the 3s and the 2s. But those 4-episode arcs dominate my favorite arcs of the show. And that's part of why I think the show got better. Not that they were always good at using 4-episode arcs. Sometimes they probably should have used less. But it allowed them to make deeper, bigger stories than they did earlier on in the show when they weren't doing that. So if I'm talking about some of my least favorite, we're going to start talking about some really, really short arcs. A whole bunch of 2-episode arcs populate that area of my least favorite. So to go no further, talking about some of those least favorite arcs in here, I've mentioned already one of them during the course of this live stream, Blue Shadow Virus. Definitely one of my least favorite arcs of the entire show. It was just, to me, a waste of an arc. And so was, in the same season, the Rescue R2 arc earlier in season 1. One of my absolute least favorite arcs of the whole show. And heck, R2 and C3PO, it's not the only time they get a least favorite arc. Oh man, when we jump later over to, what is that, season 4. Oh, that was painful. Painful arc right there. And if I'm going to go a little further, now here's where I get in a little trouble, because there are a lot of people that like that Mon Calamari arc. I really didn't. I really just did not like it. It just didn't work for me. I talked about it back when I was starting up that season, but oh man. It is actually in my 5 least favorite arcs of the entire show. Now, not my least favorite episodes, because some of the individual episodes were real clunkers during the course of this show as a whole. But yeah. And so that's just part of where that goes. And one thing I'll note about talking about least favorite arcs, with the exception of the Disappeared arc, with the exception of that one, all of my least favorite arcs are going to be much earlier in the show. They're all pretty much early season 4 and before that, with the exception of that. Just had to have one last bad arc in there later. And I remember I figured that Disappeared arc was actually part of a 3-episode arc, and so I screwed up in how I went about planning my videos for it. Luckily, I had that Darth Maul Son of Dathomir comic that kind of bailed me out and made it so that I could actually have a full-size video that made everything work still. But if I hadn't had that, I don't know exactly what I would have done right there for video, so that was a fun little time. By the way, if anybody's got any questions, toss them over into the chat over there. I'm more than happy to go ahead and see some questions in there that I can go ahead and start responding to. So I've got, let's see, a couple. Let's see. And actually, I think I will toss them up over here. I can do that too, so that way everybody can go ahead and see them as well, in case something weird happens, because last week's live stream no longer seems to have the chat up. And from what I have gone ahead and seen and noticed about that, it seems that because there was a copyright claim on it, back to that little portion where sadly I had all the audio playing from the actual episode itself, but sadly because there was a copyright claim on it, it seems they took down the chat, and they don't restore the chats even after you deal with the copyright claim, which we did, but And that just seems to be a going problem. And hey, you can't go ahead and even talk to YouTube support until you actually are part of the partner program, which, well, we're still about 250 subscribers short of being able to get into that. So, channel's getting there, but not quite there yet. Okay. So let's see. Talk about a few of you over here in chat. So Henry said, that he thinks the videos were cool and it was awesome to see a person new to the series watch it. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Hopefully it was a fun ride all the way through. And then Maddie says, hi, what do you think about Grievous in the Clone Wars? Okay, so I'm going to assume not just Grievous in the Clone Wars, but also say Grievous compared to Grievous over in the actual movie, too. And I don't have a comparison to Grievous in the other anime Clone Wars. I haven't seen it. But Grievous in this one, the introduction to Grievous in the animated Clone Wars, I wasn't the biggest fan of early on, say, in that very, very first arc when we got to that. But later on, we definitely had some good stuff with Grievous. So once we got over to a little later, it was that Kit Fisto episode in season 1. I think that was season 1 still. Anyway, point being is it got a lot better there, and I really enjoyed some of the depth we got on him there at that point in time. But I just wish the show had given us a bit more of that background, a bit more of diving into the lore. Usually we just never got a chance to round him out as a character, and I think that's my biggest disappointment with Grievous in the Clone Wars. But overall, yeah, he was definitely enjoyable. An enjoyable villain, went through. Yeah, I think that's what I would end up saying. And compared to the movie, well, I mean, in the movie, heck, he's certainly got a little more dimension than he does in the movie, just because we have more time to explore that, especially in that one episode. Yeah. Let's see, what about the Mortise Arc? Well, the Mortise Arc, I loved. It doesn't quite make one of my top 5 arcs, but it's probably not very far outside of that. Heck, I actually went ahead and rated arcs as I went through things. So I have numbers on those, just because for me, but heck, if one were to redo it, I'd probably give different numbers to things too. But no, Mortise Arc was certainly one of my favorite arcs of the show. My favorite arc of the season there, back in season 3, was actually the arc right before it, though. The Night Sisters arc was my favorite. But Mortise was right behind that. And it was an interesting arc. I certainly talked about it when I made that video, but there were parts that I really liked, and then there were parts where it felt a little cliche at times, but, yeah, overall, definitely really good. And then, let's see, Misty Fox. Quick question, would I be able to react to Star Wars 2003? Yes, I'm planning on going ahead and doing that at some point. The question was more when. So I wasn't sure when I wanted to do that. I figured, looking at it, because somebody had asked, I don't know if it was in a comment on a previous video. And so it looks like it's probably going to be 2 videos. I'll break it out into. The question is really when I'm going to go ahead and do that. So probably after I finish watching through Rebels, I'm thinking. So I guess in that case, it'll be a good few months. But yeah, definitely that's on my radar to go ahead and do. Let's see. So R says, and what about the Mortise Sisters arc? That arc was one of the bad ones in later seasons, or did I like it? No, it is definitely one of the weaker ones, to be sure. But I also didn't hate it. So it's certainly not in like the bottom 5 arcs. Heck, it's probably not even in the bottom 10 arcs. Ultimately, overall, I give it around, let's say, a 5 out of 10. So it's just kind of a middling arc for me as to just where I looked at that one. And to be honest, if that arc were, let's say it's in a vacuum, so we don't know what came before. Let's say there was a good Ahsoka arc that came right before, as season 7 was a longer season. I think it probably would have had a better rating from me. Now, that may be a little unfair to that arc, but it was, even with lowered expectations, because people had talked about it a lot, I still did have expectations going into it. And I was still disappointed that we got so little development out of Ahsoka in an arc that clearly featured Ahsoka. We didn't get to hear really about what happened to her between the end of season 5 and there in the middle of season 7. And some of that should have been in that arc, and so that certainly disappointed me. And so, yeah. Ultimately, though, it was probably, let's see, aside from the disappeared arc of season 6, it was probably one of the weakest arcs of the final 3 seasons of 5, 6, and 7. Heck, even going back to season 4, it was one of the weakest arcs there. You know, if we take out Mon Calamari and R2-D2 C-3PO arc, if we take those two out, it was the weakest even including that season. So, yeah, no, it was a sadly weak arc just because it could have been so much more. But I enjoyed some things in it, and heck, it would be nice to see the Mortise sisters pop back up. We did a good bit of time introducing them, and yeah, I'd appreciate seeing them again sometime. Although I've heard that they don't exist yet, but hey, that's one of the things I figured when I was watching. I'm like, oh, okay, they're probably introducing somebody that's already been in somewhere later in the show. Although only to find out, well, that clearly wasn't the case because they have never popped into the show at any point in time, apparently, or Rebels or anything else. At least going off of what I got in comments anyway, because I haven't delved into that or anything, but yeah. So that would be my thoughts on that Mortise sisters arc. And I've got no more questions there, so I'll jump back and... what has it? Somebody had asked me back in the other live stream. Okay, wait, hang on. I'll respond to this question first. Let's see. Maddie says, I'm really curious what you will say about Rebels because even if the last 2 seasons were better, I somehow can't like the show. Yeah, I have no idea. I've certainly heard a lot of people who aren't as big a fan of Rebels, although I've also seen some people who seem to be fans of it, so it should be interesting. I swear I've seen at least an image or 2 from the thing pop up on the internet or wherever else, and the animation style, unless I'm mistaken on, say, Vader, is a really odd animation, although I'll run into it when I do here, but I think that was from Rebels. Just like a really elongated mask, and just really going to be jarring if that is the case, so we'll see. And I think there were some also things about how different some other people look too. I don't know. So we'll see what I see. It's going to be, what? So Monday we're going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and have that video for the final arc. The next week I'll go ahead and do the video on another of the missing arcs, Crystal Crisis, and then I'll start up Rebels the week after that. The only question I've been debating still is, we've also got those canon comics that chronologically happened before Rebels, or I guess kind of during it as well, since it's flashing back, but it really takes place before it, I guess. And so my only debate has been whether I should start with those canon comics or whether I should jump straight into Rebels. And I think I'm leaning towards jumping straight into Rebels and doing it after season 1, because looking around, that seems to be the major comment, although people go both ways, but it seems that people think after season 1 is the best timing. And hey, with how everybody seems to talk about how weak season 1 is in Rebels, maybe that'll be a good thing because it'll jump me out, get me some more depth, and then bring me back in. I don't know. All the tricks of watching something when you haven't seen it before, and there are potential different choices on how to go through it and what's the best way to watch it, right? It's such a trick. Again, I'm happy with how I went through Clone Wars, but tricky. Although, to be honest, if I had really understood that Crystal Crisis was developed as much as it was, I would have made sure to have gotten to it earlier on in here. Okay. So let's see, what else was I going to say? Right. So last week Someone was asking, how I would think about the movies now with the context of having seen Clone Wars as well, what kind of depth that adds, etc. Now, I think the greatest area where it really adds a lot of depth is actually when we talk about the more minor characters. If we're talking about people like Anakin and Obi-Wan, not so much. I don't need the extra depth that was added in by Clone Wars. Yes, it added, definitely. And there are actually slightly different takes on the characters. But it's especially when we talk about the smaller people, like, say, Kit Fisto or Shock T or etc., 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 especially amongst the different Jedi. And then by far and above what Clone Wars does a great job is the very name itself. It's the clones. And it adds so much more depth to the very clones that we're seeing. So Rex and Cody and all of the individuals, whether we're talking about Jesse and Fives and Echo and Heavy and etc., etc., etc. And so that's where I think especially the show shines in terms of expanding on the movies and giving me a greater depth and care about what goes on in there. So now when I watch the movies and I go ahead and see someone in there, that's going to go ahead and add a fair bit. You had a message that it looks like you retracted there. I think you were asking something about minor characters to pop into only one episode. And I didn't quite catch the rest of it before it went away. But as far as how that expands, say, the galaxy, or as far as what it does for enhancing, say, the movie experience itself, I don't think it does a lot for enhancing, say, the movies themselves, because usually the characters that just pop up for a single episode are not very relevant directly to the movies. But certainly in the general sense of expanding the galaxy, giving us a better idea of everything overall, yeah, definitely. Definitely. Although often I'm sad about the characters that pop up only into one, just because we don't have enough time to really develop those characters as far as would be nice. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that really stand out to me. Let's see. Kit Fisto's apprentice. That actually pops out to me as a character that was only in a single episode. The clone that Rex ended up meeting down on that planet when they were chasing Grievous. That one pops out to me a little. That person was only in one, and so we got to see him with the family. Now, in fairness, in some ways that was more a reflection on Rex and the clones as a whole, too, so maybe that's not as fair to just say, hey, it's somebody we only saw one time. And then later on, we get all these arcs, so you don't tend to see much of anybody just one time. So, man, I'm trying to... a lot of those people that only appear in one episode just kind of fade off into the background because you don't get to know them. And then I'm even thinking about people that are just in one arc, but that's not the same thing, because we certainly get time if you got, say, a 3-4 episode arc to get to know you a little bit. Yeah, you got some other ones of those characters that only pop up into one episode. Go ahead and pop them in there, and I'll make some comments and responses to them. But they just don't pop up too much off the top of my head right now. Because I keep going, oh, wait, no, that was actually a 2-episode arc. No, that was a 3-episode arc. Yeah. One thing I'm going to do in terms of Clone Wars and talking about how it interacts with the movies is I do intend to go back sometime. And I was shared that cool way of interacting and splicing together Clone Wars and Episode 3. And I'm going to give that a shot sometime and see how that works and see what I think of going ahead and doing that in the first place. Hopefully it's not too jarring to jump back and forth between the movie and Clone Wars, between the animation and the live action. We'll see. But I'm curious to see what kind of effect that gives. And I haven't done that yet, but it'll be fun to do it when I do. Okay, anybody else got some questions for me? Or should I just ramble on something else about Clone Wars for a moment? Hey, we got 13 people in here now. We're actually in the double digits. Thank you, everyone, for popping up. Unsurprisingly, not as popular as, say, the season 7 final arc. Should just talk about everything as a whole, huh? Okay, so let's see. Some other things to talk about on the series as a whole. Now, I don't know. There are some people I'm sure that would watch everything if you were to go ahead and rewatch a show. And I do that on certain shows. Although there are shows that I would not do that on. Heck, if we're going to talk other franchises entirely, say Star Trek, would not go ahead and watch every single episode, especially of the original, just because the quality can vary so incredibly. And I think a similar thing is true for me here in Clone Wars, because the quality does vary that much, especially early on, especially in those early seasons. And so I would get a much shorter one, and I guess it would depend on just how much I wanted to shorten that and how much I wanted to just jump in. But at the same time, because of how arcish this show gets, I could just revisit certain arcs easily. Oh, heck yes to some of those. But I could easily enough skip things like the Zelo Beast. And it's interesting. I swear I heard that they were originally planning another follow-up episode to Zelo Beast, which it always felt like they were intending that, and then they never ended up doing it. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sad they didn't, because I wasn't a fan of that 2-episode arc. It just, I know what they were trying for, and it achieved some of the feel of it, but it just didn't work well for me. Heck, I've talked about enough of the show through the other videos that you guys have a pretty good idea where some of my favorite stuff is, where some of the weakest stuff is. So, let's see. Some of the characters that I really wish we had gotten back to. Ventress, obviously. You all know I would have loved to have seen more Ventress. And I know they intended an 8-episode arc, and someday I will read that book and get to go ahead and see roughly what was intended in there. But, oh, that's one of my sadnesses right there, is not having gotten more Ventress. Because one of my favorite characters here in Clone Wars, and a character that doesn't exist really outside of it. So, as I said, really cool introduction. And R says, what did I think of Savage's tragic fate? Oh, I was sad to see Savage go. I really had hoped to see more of him too, in fairness. But, yeah, and he just went so quick. I mean, it played really well in the arc that it was in. Heck, the way it was done, the way it also affected Maul in there, yeah, nicely done. If I could have seen a little more aftermath of it, all the better, but hey, that's me, right? So, yeah, he was always going to have a tragic fate. His character arc never felt like it was going to go anywhere other than something tragic. And so, it's not like I was hoping for something different or expecting something different. And that certainly means it didn't hurt in that sense. But, I mean, it kind of came out of the blue. To be honest, I wasn't expecting it right there. And yeah, sad to see him go. And, oh, well, General Kenobi. Tigra Vika saying hello there. In case anyone's wondering why I just randomly said General Kenobi. Okay. So, other characters that I would have loved to have seen expanded on, Latz. Latz was a character we only just saw a little bit of near late in the Ventress portion. And to be honest, the way she and Ventress interacted was also curious. And yeah, it would have been nice to have seen a little more there. And of course, that jumps me over to Boba Fett, who, I feel like we could have gone so much further with Boba Fett over here in Clone Wars. And I think, if memory serves, someone's talked about how there was going to be another Boba Fett arc here in the late portion, season 6, 7-ish time period. And I wish we'd gotten that, because there felt like there was so much more we could have gotten into with his character. Now, I mean, there's so many characters that I'm good with how we dealt with them. Let's say Maul, for instance. Although, ignoring the fact that the comic wasn't actually made. But otherwise, Maul was handled really well and developed really great through the course of the show. And then we could also talk about other characters like, I mean, that'd make, yeah, especially some of the clones. Let's say Rex was developed really well through the course of the show. We could talk about Fives was developed really well. Echo, especially because he came back, I thought got good development. Heavy went out so quick. He was just one of those minor characters that popped in for a tiny little arc, and then he's gone. uh, yeah. I liked what we did with Mace during the course of the show. Early on, he was a little more one-dimensional, especially in that first Ryloth arc, but we developed him more as the show went on, and we got to see a bit more of him, and that was nicely done. Even if, yes, Mace can be an ass sometimes. I mean, it's part of who he is, so I don't have a big problem with that. Oh, I guess I could, let's see. Might as well. Let's talk about Jar Jar, shall we? I'll say that, and then I'll go over to Honda. Jar Jar. Oh, man. Jar Jar rarely was good, and usually was a harbinger of the worst of Clone Wars. Oh, man. Ultimately, if you take out all the bad Jar Jar stuff, there's actually some good stuff in the course of the show. I could say that, huh? Let's see. What about Hondo? Oh, yes. I didn't mention Hondo there when I was talking about good characters, but I loved Hondo in the course of this show. One of my favorite characters, and I swear I've heard that he pops up later as well. Spoiler for myself, I grant, but I swear I've heard it. So I don't think I'm done seeing Hondo, and that will be cool if that's the case. I certainly would have taken some more Hondo here, say, in the final season. Of course, we would have needed more arcs probably to do that, because I don't think he fit into anything of what we had, but, oh, just the wit, the dry humor, personality. Oh, yeah. Loved him all around. I don't think there was ever a time I really disliked having, or a portrayal of Hondo. There were a couple issues I had, I think, in the Younglings arc. Just in their portrayal of Hondo a little bit, but that was it. Otherwise, it was such a great portrayal through the entire course of the show. And R saying that, yeah, there was a Boba Fett and Cad Bane arc. Right. That's what it was. And unfinished animation, too. Okay, I'll definitely have to look at that. So, unfinished animation, I'm assuming they don't actually have, say, a voiced script, too, kind of like the Crystal Crisis that I was noticing. If they do, let me know. Maybe I'll toss that in as another video, I guess. We'll see. I mean, if they went that far with it. Which I was surprised by that on the Crystal Crisis, that they actually seem to have voiced it, too, from what I've noticed. I haven't watched it yet, but if they hadn't voiced it, I wouldn't be intending to do another video probably on it, just like that, but they have. But yeah, no, Hondo. Yeah. Some of the other bounty hunters, Cad Bane, also, speaking of a bounty hunter that was handled really well through most of the course of the show. There's one instance especially where it just was a bit of a weaker performance, but that was one of the weakest episodes of the entire show, which was that R2 and C3PO episode. Oh, because they had to create a prequel to the whole Senate hostage crisis thing. Oh, talk about unnecessary episodes that you can just completely skip, and the show will be no worse for wear for having never seen the video at all. But no, Cad Bane, yes, loved him as a character. There were there's some bounty hunters. Speaking of characters, minor ones that pop up only into one, in the Cube episode, I think it was called The Box, there were definitely a few bounty hunters we saw for the one and only time during the course of that one. Oh man, what were some of them? And they actually were some interesting potential characters in there that we just didn't really get to go ahead and see. Let's see, we certainly got to see a few of them in larger parts. Oh, speaking of, characters that were minor that I loved. How about Embo? Oh, Embo was cool. We never really got to dig into who Embo was or anything. So he kind of has this whole mystique still around him. And I'm okay with that ultimately, even if I'd love to go ahead and, I don't know, get, say, a short story, a book that would dive in more to some of the bounty hunters here. I remember back from the extended universe that back in the good old EU, there was one that did expand on a number of the different bounty hunters. There's some of those old books out there that you can go ahead and find. And that was cool, getting to catch a bit more on, say, IG-88 and Boba Fett, and etc., etc., etc. Even Dengar, who pops up over here into Clone Wars. But anyway, it was cool to get a little bit more, but short story format's fine for that, because it gives you a little more without trying to make a giant story out of a character who actually is relatively small in here. But I think that would be something I would love to see on somebody like Embo. And are saying they actually voiced some unfinished arcs. Yeah, I was noticing that on Crystal Crisis, but is that true on the Boba Fett arc too? Interesting if it is. Okay. I'll have to look into that and see if it is then. Okay. Oh, speaking of those bounty hunters that you could have those short little stories on, how about the pair right there? What was it? Anka and his brother. Those two that were apparently a legendary team. It could have been interesting to see whatever the heck happened between those two right there, just in a short story expansion. So yeah, there were certainly some minor characters there that just never popped up into anything bigger. No, I was gonna say those single episode minor characters, from some of those, but no, again, it's a 2-episode arc as I'm thinking about some other stuff. Another character that really got some fun expansion on in here, other Sith characters like both Dooku and Palpatine both got some expansion within here. Palpatine, generally good. Although sometimes we went a little over the top because we just wanted our cliche villain, I feel, sometimes. But nevertheless, I think a lot of what we ended up doing with Palpatine was pretty good through the course of the show. We had some fun times where we just ended with Palpatine doing his Burns pose over in his chambers. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, exactly. And then Dooku. Now we got to see so much more of Dooku in here. And that was really nice. I don't think I really have much of any disappointment on how Dooku was treated over the course of the show. I think he was generally done quite well. Unlike Grievous, who had to play the I'm gonna run away card numerous times, Dooku was able to be a little further back in the background, which made it so he didn't have to be right there and running away again and again, which was definitely an advantage. And so it allowed him to really be... Mastermind's not the right word, just because obviously Palpatine is the actual mastermind there, but he gets a bit more of that, and we get to delve a little more into him as a character. Let's see. R says, I think you can't find the Boba Fett arc, just a couple scenes out of it. Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, yeah, I said I have somebody shared me a playlist of a whole bunch of that unfinished videos, so yeah, I'll take a look at what's in there, and who knows, maybe I'll put a little appendix at the end when I do the Crystal Crisis arc, and I'll just talk about a couple of those pieces too. Maybe that's what I'll end up doing. So there are a couple pieces from, say, the Boba Fett arc or other tiny little things that they just didn't end up making. Maybe we'll go ahead and go about it that way. I will say, I am all 100% for them finishing up all of these unfinished arcs, because from what I've heard, there are a ton of them that they just never ended up making, and oh man, I mean, there's so much more that we could go ahead and go back into, and that would be really nice. I think I had a list of them. Let's see if I do. Ah, yes, here it is. Here it is, good old Wikipedia. Speaking of arcs that weren't finished. Oh, uh, yeah, the Dark Disciple section, of course. There was a Bounty Hunter arc. Ahsoka's Walkabout was originally unfinished and then put together. But apparently, the Ahsoka's Walkabout originally was not with the two Mortise sisters, and instead she had developed a close romantic relationship with a scoundrel named Nix. That would have been an intriguing, different way to go about it, and to be honest, that would make me think that it probably would have had more character development for her if we'd gone that way. So that would have been interesting if we'd actually gone the Nix route. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the Mortise sisters. We introduced a couple interesting characters to potentially go with. Although we didn't really get to see the Ahsoka development that I would have loved. Let's see, what else do we got? What was my opinion on the last episode because I haven't finished my reaction? On the last episode because I haven't finished my reaction. I am not sure what you're asking exactly, Maddie. You're talking about the last episode of the show? Because I did go ahead, I went ahead and did that live. So, talking about that final arc, I utterly loved that final arc. Oh, you probably didn't watch the live stream. That's probably what that means. Okay. But no, utterly loved it. And as I said, that arc fired on every cylinder, whether we were talking about the amazing music in it, whether we were talking about the visuals that were definitely at the peak of their game for this series, whether we're talking about the fighting that outdid anything that the show has done before. There was some impressive fighting. Oh, excuse me. Whether we're going in and talking about the characters we saw, whether we're talking about the heartbreak that pops up into that arc numerous times. Heck, I was surprised by certain things on timing and things that didn't happen too, that I thought, oh, okay, this is going to happen probably, or this will, or... And at the same time, I was surprised, but I can't say I'm disappointed in the end because it was such an amazing arc. Yeah. No, it was just so good. And the ending was a beautiful ending. There were so many moments during that arc that you could just have done a freeze frame and make a poster out of it just because there were great visual moments in there too. Let's see, what else do we got over there? Did I notice Dave Filoni had a cameo in The Mandalorian episode 6? I don't think I noticed it at the time. No, I did not notice it at the time. Certainly over the course of watching the Disney Gallery The Mandalorian series, obviously I came aware of it because they talked about it. But I don't think I was aware of it at the time of watching Mandalorian. I don't have a memory of that. That's fine. You guys can ask a Mandalorian question. That's nothing wrong here. Got an open live stream. I got no problem with that. Feel free to ask. Obviously, we're mostly talking about Clone Wars, but yeah, if you want to ask something like that, go ahead. No problem here. Let's see, what are some of the other arcs that they did not make in the show? They had a Kashyyyk arc, apparently a 4-episode arc, it says, that would have starred Yoda and the Bad Batch over on Kashyyyk. Now, I'm curious, because we now have a Bad Batch show coming up, I wonder if this arc will actually get reworked into something in the actual Bad Batch show. So this might just get moved over there. After all, it's Dave Filoni heading up that show too, unless I'm mistaken. I think it is Dave Filoni on Bad Batch. So we could just move that over there, see Yoda again be a little earlier in time. I can see that happen. Rex and R2 Top Gun? Oh god. Dave Filoni says this was Top Gun with clones. It was basically the army clones. The ground forces got an argument with their pilots, and R2 insulted an astromech, and it became this thing where Rex ended up having to fly a fighter with R2 as his co-pilot. Well, with how R2 episodes tended to be in the course of the show, I can't say as I have any disappointment with not seeing the Rex and R2 Top Gun show. Although Rex things tend to be good, so who knows? Maybe it would have been enjoyable. I do enjoy Top Gun, so yeah, you never know. Because Freudman says that it started out light and fun, but went to some very unexpected and dark places. Very interesting. I just with that short description, I don't know what to think of the fact we didn't get that arc or what it really would have done. So very interesting. Jumping back over to your guys' questions. Let's see. Did watching Clone Wars change my opinion about the prequels in general? In general, no. In general, my opinion on the prequels still is what it was. What it did do, as I was saying earlier in the stream, is especially on some of the minor characters, it went ahead and expanded some of those minor characters, and it expanded some of my knowledge of the clones and who they are and those kind of aspects. But that doesn't really change my general opinion of the prequels. Bear in mind, I love the prequels anyway. I mean, Episode 3 is my favorite of the Star Wars movies. So it's not like I had this bad opinion on the prequels and therefore Clone Wars would have heavily improved it or something like that. So no, as I said, very similar overall opinion, but it adds some depth that way, which is nice. Let's see, Tagrovica, Tagrovica, there we go. We're going to pronounce your name that way, and hopefully it's similar to what you envision it as. Let's see, yeah, I also had this arc in mind when they announced the Bad Batch show. Talking about that Kashyyyk one, yeah, exactly. Because, yeah, that looks like something that could pop in. And what about my opinion on the Onderon arc? What do I think about Steela's death and Saw Gerrera's appearance in Rogue One? So, of course, the funny part here is for me, I saw Rogue One first, so I saw Saw Gerrera first there. Although apparently he was actually introduced as a character in Clone Wars long before Rogue One, which is interesting. I don't know if that changed my opinion on Saw Gerrera because I saw it that way. Just because those characters, you can see the connection between them, but they're so far removed in time. There's a lot that's happened to Saw in between these two times that in some ways he's almost a different character. Even though clearly he's the same character that evolves over time to get to where he is in Rogue One. But the Onderon arc, I like the Onderon arc. It did not reach the heights it could have, I think. And Steela's death, I was predicting Steela's death earlier in the arc because I figured it would be something that would catalyze even more conflict between our other two main characters in there. And, well, that didn't end up actually happening, of course. She died near the end, so it didn't catalyze a fight between them. And maybe in books or something you could expand and there could really be issues between those two. But as it was, it just really didn't go ahead and happen that way. So, ultimately, Steela's death, given that it didn't happen earlier and it didn't catalyze what I thought would have been some interesting story threads, I think we definitely could have kept Steela alive. Maybe killed somebody else that was important. But that's okay. And heck, Saw in Rogue One, I mean, Forrest Whitaker playing Saw. Who doesn't love seeing Forrest Whitaker pop into whatever the heck? As I said, he did a great job with the character there, even as briefly as we see Saw. Let's see. Wonder if Clone Wars has changed Anakin's opinion on sand. I don't see why it would. Give me a reason why somehow Anakin would stop hating sand at this point, right? Hey, I identify a little right there. Except I love beaches and all. But dang, sand can be bloody annoying. Just gets everywhere and then it's a pain to get off. As cheesy as the line may be, that not really the point, right? Let's see, if the last arc were a real Star Wars movie, where would it be in my rankings with all the other movies from all the eras? Ooh, wow, that's a tricky one. Wow. Interesting question. Of course, it also has this intriguingly unfair advantage of sitting at the end of an entire series where we've gotten to know all these characters far better because of that. So it does have an unfair advantage that way. Although, in fairness, anybody that reads books or comics or anything else has all that extra pieces of depth on any of the characters we're talking about from whatever set of movies. So that exists in other ways too. Let's see. Man, it would definitely rank high. No question on that for me. Ooh, it's a tricky one. It is so interconnected to episode 3 and the events of it that it also makes it tricky. I mean, you need to know the events of what happened there. Oh, man. That is an intriguing question. I mean, in a way, it is a real Star Wars movie. It was clearly shot to be like one. Although, I think if you'd made it a real movie, there were probably certain things you would change even then. And you'd probably lengthen a little too if I was going to make a guess. Because relative to most Star Wars movies, it's actually shorter. And that would be interesting to see what you'd add to it, too. But yeah, tricky. I mean, I put it above episode 1, and I put it above the sequel trilogy, if we're talking that. And the problem is, oh yeah, it's also the characters we're looking at. I love Ahsoka as a character, but it fails to have some of the same epic scope that a lot of Star Wars movies do. It's a much more tight story following Ahsoka during the course of the Sand Racks. And so that makes it more in the league of not being the main saga movies, which all have that epic scope. And maybe I speak a little too quickly when I talk about what it's above to or behind. And I love the epic scope when we're talking the saga movies. So yeah, I'll think about that one more. Maybe I'll come back to that. I'll be cagey right there, huh? What is my opinion on the sequels? Yeah. So the sequels. I said someday I'll make some videos on this too, to be sure. But so, Force Awakens. Certainly, I was excited when that movie was first coming. I mean, they did some great trailers for that one too. And Force Awakens, I have seen 4 or 5 times, somewhere in there probably. Which, bear in mind, that's way less than I've seen any of the OG6, shall we say, the original and the prequel. I've seen all of those dozens of times. But anyway, so I've seen that probably 4 or 5 times. I've seen Last Jedi 3 times. And I've seen Rise of Skywalker once. And only once. Someday I'll go back and watch it again just to go give it a second viewing. But yeah. So there is a lot of things. And by the way, whatever your opinion is on the sequel trilogy, that is perfectly fine. You've heard this from me before as I've watched through Clone Wars. You can have a completely different opinion than me. I don't care. That's perfectly fine. I neither utterly hate the sequel trilogy, nor do I utterly love it. Let's put it that way off the bat. But it could have been so much more. Now, I also come at this from a spot where I knew the EU well. I've read a ton of books in the EU. So, I have... So, to me, the sequel trilogy is an alternate reality. I'm sorry, it's not the EU that's the alternate reality. It's that way. It just is for me. But there are so many things that could have gone well. And I think the single biggest problem with the sequel trilogy is the lack of an overall vision. Because essentially what ended up happening was you had the different directors fighting with each other over the course of it and retconning the last person's work. And whatever else one might say, clearly the 3 movies would have been stronger if they hadn't been spending so much time retconning the last person's movie. And yes, that was done by both of them. And dang. Oh, what a bloody mess it was. Yeah. So I wasn't a fan of Rise of Skywalker. That's why I've only seen it once. But ultimately, I will watch it again sometime. I give it a second viewing. But there are characters that I really would have loved to have gone ahead and seen more. Hey, I'll check Jorum's comment here. Loved Force Awakens when it came out and still like it, but it is not very rewatchable. I despise Last Jedi for all the opportunities it threw away for cheap laughs, and also for killing my favorite character. Yes, actually, that is your cheap laughs comment. I assume it's similar to one of my biggest issues with it, aside from, let's say, retconning. But there was an overwhelming use of bathos at points during the course of Last Jedi. So bathos being, you have a serious moment, and then all of a sudden you toss in this humor that just completely deflates it. So, yeah, that was some of my biggest problems with it. But there was also a lot that was really good about Last Jedi. Tricky and messy. Let's put it that way. Overall, ultimately, heck, I would watch any of the first 6 probably easily before I'd watch the new 3, just because. And if the EU didn't exist, what would be my opinion of the sequel trilogy would be an interesting question right here. Because my opinion probably wouldn't be as poor on the sequel trilogy if I didn't know the EU, if I hadn't expanded hugely on the characters of Luke and Han and Leia, their kids, everybody else, heck, even Wedge, etc., 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 if I hadn't gotten all of that. But yeah, I even have a problem with how we set it up and how we get to the point that somehow starts in Force Awakens. I've looked in Wikipedia a little on that, and it's a little counterintuitive. It just feels forced. And, of course, that's just a starting issue. We never took the time in the movies to really explain it, but I think it's books and whatnot that really went into it and tried to go ahead and find an excuse for how we got to where that setup was. But yeah, the thing that Star Wars lacks that other places have, Marvel, the MCU, has Kevin Feige overseeing the entire thing and really having that creative vision. And Star Wars does not have anyone playing that part. And don't get me wrong, obviously Kathleen Kennedy is in charge of it, but my opinion, my take it for what it's worth, is that Kathleen Kennedy is much more the production side of making sure that everything happens rather than, say, the creative vision side. And so, unlike what a lot of studios, let's say, since we're talking Disney and the channel is Freeform Disney, what most of Disney's different departments do is you have 2 people in charge of those. Whether we're talking Disney Animation or the Marvel, or whether we're talking Pixar, you have one person that's really the creative head that stewards all of that side, and then you have the other person that deals with all of the not so glamorous side. And I think that kind of division doesn't really exist in Lucasfilm right now, and I don't know why. It feels like the very thing that's missing, that you need that creative vision to be able to tie something like this together. I'm sorry, making 3 movies that are supposed to be a trilogy and having them written by different people who aren't on the same page is not a good way to go about making a trilogy. It just isn't. It created unsurprising problems. Anyway, you guys are talking a little bit, so let me pop back in there. Oh yeah, killing off favorite character. Yes, killing off Luke, to be sure. If only you could have retconned that and killed Leia in that case, just because of what ended up happening, which was sad, but I was impressed with what they actually did do with Leia in Rise of Skywalker. I will grant that, with no new footage. Well, not really any new footage, anyway. Let's see. Also, for killing my favorite character... Oh, your favorite character was General Hux. Hux. In the first movie, there could have been some interesting directions to go with Hux. But speaking of the bathos I had a problem with in Last Jedi, Hux was one of the butts of that bathos and just got toyed around and kind of lost a lot of what made him interesting there. As much as Last Jedi certainly had a lot of good things it did too, that was on the negative side right there for me. Oh, that must be what you mean by killing him, since he didn't actually technically die in Last Jedi. Let's see. I feel I'm the only one who liked Rise of Skywalker just because it repaired much of what was destroyed by Episode 8. Well, yeah, as I said, I wasn't a fan. I just didn't think the movie held together well. It just did not work for me. And I didn't hate Last Jedi. Obviously, there are people that hated it. There are people that absolutely loved it. And I'm not in either of those two camps. I liked it. Overall, I liked it, but again, things like the bathos were one of my biggest problems. Sure, I would have wished certain other things had happened, but some of that was set up by the movie before. There are certain cues back to every director rewriting the previous one and retconning things that were clearly set up by Force Awakens and didn't get followed through on in the next movie, which was a mess, and then things that were set up in Last Jedi didn't get followed through on by Rise of Skywalker. Just such a mess. Oh, what do you even do with that? Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah. Heck, while we talk bathos, want an unpopular opinion? Here's an unpopular opinion, non-Star Wars related, for a quick second. Thor Ragnarok, I have huge issues with for bathos. There were so many super serious things that should have gotten that care and should have really mattered, and then we always toss in a laugh at the wrong time. And oh, that one, it killed me. It should have been so much better than it was. I think the problem was trying to toss too much into that. And so, really, you can understand that bathos there also hurts me. Anyway, another time, wrong genre. Let's move on. Inconsistency in tone. Yeah, certainly was that. I wouldn't say it felt more like a comedy to me. I would say Last Jedi certainly felt like a dark movie. It's just that that darkness was hampered time and again by tossing in exactly that, those comedy moments. But overall, I'd say it's still... I don't think I'd call it a dark movie, though, even then. But certainly, yeah, not a comedy. It just tossed in enough comedic moments that it hurt the feel of the movie. uh, let's see. So many plot holes. Yes, indeed. The interesting thing, talking about plot holes, because plot holes get brought up a lot. An interesting thing that I found, if you like the movie overall more, you like the characters, the story works well, etc., you're a lot more forgiving on plot holes than you are when that's not the case. Although there are times when plot holes are so big that they'll hit you anyway. But I find it interesting myself looking at things where I am more forgiving on plot holes and things where I am less forgiving. And noticing that some of that really doesn't have to do with the plot holes as much as all the other aspects of the movie, which can be really interesting sometimes. But yeah, certainly it did. One last thing, I love how they switched the hold-up maneuver from something heroic to her trying to get the F out of there in Rise of Skywalker. Okay, I don't think I caught that out of it, but certainly they made it 1 in a million, so it was a rare thing. Not that it was not heroic. It was still meant as heroic. But that, I think, was their excuse to go ahead and tamp it down, so we can't say, hey, we can just do this everywhere and make it work all the time, because that, unsurprisingly, creates a huge problem, because sure, it's expensive to use big ships to do this, but why wouldn't you do more of it if you can have this kind of an effect? Yeah. Just, like it because I dislike The Last Jedi so much. Never watched episode 9, definitely don't want to go through it. I can understand that. I can definitely understand that. What's also tricky is there are characters that I like, in there, but as a whole, it's part of why I still don't know what to do in my own headcanon for the sequel trilogy. I just don't know what to do with it. In part also because, heck, it fights itself during the course of it. So even if I could try to accept it otherwise, what do I do with that? But do you put it in? For me, I still kind of have that EU up higher up. That is kind of where I see the sequels going. And I wish they had gone into that universe rather. I mean, there was room to go ahead and make a sequel trilogy that was in the world that was created by the EU. You didn't have to wipe the whole thing. But oh well. So I have a slightly different, problem, that way than a number of people do, just because I'm so versed in what happened in there. Okay, I'm gonna jump back. Let's talk about some more. Let's talk about some more of the unfinished pieces or things that they talk over here that they hadn't done in Clone Wars, but there were plans on. This one intrigues me right here. They apparently plan to do a Yusung Vong episode, or I'm not sure if it was a big arc or whatnot, but that's intriguing. It says it would have involved them in a very minimal way, which would, even with this whole change we've made, would have actually made the Yusung Vong canon, even at this point in time, because now they're not canon because everything got turned into legends. But that would have been cool. As I said, that was one heck of a mighty arc. I the whole New Jedi arc with New Jedi Order arc. I think I just said New Jedi arc. Anyway, the New Jedi Order arc with its 20 books going all the way through. Oh, I loved it. And there was one book actually set in a prequel time, I think between episode 1 and episode 2. Or was it somewhere in there, that actually touched on an early piece of Yusung Vong. And then that all created a potential justification of Palpatine doing some of what he did, actually knowing the Yusung Vong were coming, which is an intriguing extra piece. Although what this says about, to better align with George Lucas's description of the Force, the Vong did not have any Force immunity in this story. That would just be like nails on a chalkboard right there. Because that's just so key to who the Vong were and something special in them and how it expanded the view on the Force. But still, it would have been cool to have had them actually pop up in some way over within Clone Wars, just as a reference. Let's see. Oh, seeing the Yusung Vong story was meant to be like alien-style arc. Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at the Wikipedia. It says the X-Files one with an alien abduction event. It's like interesting stuff. Oh, Joram Sim, one other comment there. Now that John Williams has officially retired from Star Wars, do I believe Kevin Kiner, the guy who made the music in Clone Wars, would be able to carry on the torch? Well, here's the thing. We can let's talk about, say, even the music over in Mandalorian, for instance, which is not John Williams' music. We're not talking about the music that is meant to be the epic saga music. And the Star Wars galaxy can be far larger than just one set of ideas or one set of music. It's a giant galaxy. So I don't think it's a case of picking up the torch from John Williams as much as doing adjacent work, shall we say. And in that case, yeah, definitely. I think he can definitely pull off adjacent work. To try to go ahead and do John Williams, though, John Williams is so impressive in his style. Whatever movies we're talking about, I've always been impressed with his music. So that's what I think I would say over there. So I don't think it's carrying on a torch as much as expanding the idea. Same as we'll see with other music and other pieces that are going to happen in the future. Let's see, what else do they mention that was unfinished? There was a return to the Jedi Temple, which apparently would have given us a little more on Ahsoka, because it would have been what lay beneath the Jedi Temple, similar to how churches were often built on a previous religious center. Interesting. So maybe even a Sith shrine. It sounds like a lot of maybes here, so I'm not sure how much they did. But that's interesting to actually go down in there, and would have featured Darth Sidious trying to break into the Holocron Vault and Ahsoka. So it would have been neat to have actually gotten to see Ahsoka pop back in, and that would have given us at least probably a little bit of a what the heck she was doing in between the end of season 5 and, well, middle of season 7 in the case we are. That would have been nice. Although, who knows if that arc would have been good or not. But I like the aspect of getting to see a bit of her time in between and getting to see Darth Sidious do more. I mean, he was always good when Darth Sidious was used. I don't think there was any bad time in the whole course of the series, so that would lend me to think they probably would handle it well there, too. Jumping back, let's see. Speaking about advancing the ways the Force works, what is my opinion on how they portrayed the way the Force worked in things like the Dathomir episodes? Interesting. Well, not that... Without a novelization, I don't think the Dathomir episodes ever get into such a depth that you can be clear on exactly what they're saying about the Force. Clearly it expands the use. But at the same time, without telling us exactly what the difference is and what's going on. Now, that said, in terms of talking about expanding the use of the Force, again, as someone who has read a lot of EU back in the day, then I'm fine with the Force being expanded upon, rather than the dogmatic view of the Jedi and the narrow view of the Sith, shall we say. I think there's a lot more to it, and it's cool to really get to go back into the Force and look at it in more ways than just those two, as if it's just this dichotomy between the two. And so, yeah, in that sense, yeah, definitely. I liked what they did on Dathomir and expanded upon it and worked it that way. It's interesting because also I remember Dathomir a little from the EU, and I don't remember it being... Now, bear in mind, old knowledge, don't remember full, but I don't remember it being as weird a version of the Force. Because we had the witches there. We also had the Rancor down on Dathomir, which, oh, it would be cool if we had a Rancor roaming around down on Dathomir too. Like I said, I think I'm remembering all that right. If someone could tell me I'm wrong, but I think I'm right on that memory. But I don't remember it being so different, as if it's a different element of the Force. But regardless, I thought it was well done. I enjoyed it. So yes, expand the way the Force is looked at, the way it's used. I've got no problem with that right there. Let's see, I'll keep jumping through here. Let's see, Return to Moncala is something they were planning on doing, which looks like it was going to be a 4-episode arc, because it's 17 through 20 of what was originally planned to be season 7. And would have had Padme working against Palpatine's prolonged stay in office. Actually, that would be interesting to get into that issue a little more, which actually I would have liked that just off the bat, for getting to see them start to have more issue with Palpatine staying in and start to be trying to do something about that. That off the bat, I think, would have been a positive to have had in there. Now, whether going back to Moncala would have been good or not, I don't know. Padme episodes over the course of the show were more miss than hit. They were hit sometimes. But man, so often... It's not like Jar Jar being in, where they tended to be really bad misses. But there was some good Padme stuff, too. It just didn't tend to be how we used her as a character in the show, which was too bad. I really wish it hadn't been that way. But yeah, I don't know. The Return to Moncala thing could have been interesting there, because it looks like we'd gotten a little more political, and it doesn't talk about putting in tons of fights just to put in fights, which... That was a problem the show had sometimes, while we're talking about that, is sometimes an episode that could have been perfectly good, we had to toss in some action sequences just to toss them in, because the show didn't feel it could rely on its own drama otherwise. It seems like it felt people would fall asleep if there wasn't an action scene every so often. And I was sad about that sometimes, because there were episodes where those action scenes just really didn't help or didn't add anything to it and took away even. So maybe this one would have done it, in a nice way. Who knows? There are not that many times in the course of the show that I can think where we really didn't feel the need to shove action scenes in. Most of the time it worked, but funny enough, one of those times that didn't really have much of an action scene was actually a Padme episode. Way back. That's the one where we went over into uh, into the Separatist territory and met Padme's friend and oh man, I'm blanking on his name. Ahsoka's potential love interest, who ended up not going her way in the end, went to Stella. Yada yada yada. Can't remember his name right now. Anyway, but that was actually one of the rare episodes where they didn't really feel the need to put too much action in. There was a little in there when we blew up the power station, but that was about it. And that said, that was nicely done. It was able to believe in itself and know that it didn't need to do it. An instance of one that really had action that didn't need it, for instance. That one where Rex met the other clone when they were chasing Grievous. Really, I could have just tossed away all of the section of Obi-Wan chasing Grievous and that fight that popped in on occasion. It was just unnecessary. It wasn't what was good about that episode. And so that was a key example of one of those cases where we tossed in action because they felt they needed to have it. But it really wasn't what made the episode good. Anyway. Another mean and tricky question. If you had to rank the different eras of Star Wars, originals, prequels, Clone Wars, sequels, and Star Wars stories, how would I rank them? Well, interesting how we're breaking out Clone Wars as its own era, and also Star Wars stories as its own era. So, we say Star Wars stories, and I assume you're not talking EU like books. I assume you're talking simply Rogue One and Solo, which is, well, only 2 movies, which makes it weird. Not to mention, they take place far enough apart timeline-wise, and they're quite different in field, too. Let's see. So, I mean, let's just talk originals, prequels, sequels. The sequels would be my bottom of that. And I would personally go prequels up the top and then the original in the center if I'm ranking it as a set. Now, that said, the originals are more consistent overall as a trilogy than the prequels are. But I also don't think they quite reach the heights that the prequels do either. As an avowed lover of the prequels, so. But if I'm also going to toss Clone Wars in, oh man, that just... It's a mess because Clone Wars also reaches such lows. And early on, the show has so much weakness, even though it has the good stuff in there too. And that makes it harder to place Clone Wars. If I was just ranking Clone Wars based off the best Clone Wars stuff, well, then it's going to go to a very different spot for me. But if I'm having to go rank it that way, probably, I mean, at that point we go prequels, original, Clone Wars, sequel. And if I'm tossing Star Wars stories in, right now there's only 2 movies, and I'd put it below Clone Wars in that sense, just because there's not as much content to talk about. So it just can't, it doesn't have a leg to stand on against something like Clone Wars that has 7 seasons worth of episodes. It just can't quite compete with that. Even though I've just said 2 sets of 3 movies can go ahead and compete with it, right? Well, anyway. I don't know, maybe if we expanded things like Solo and we got that arc that was clearly meant to be the start of, say, a 2-3 episode arc or whatever it was going to be. Maybe if we did things like that, if we had had the Obi-Wan movie, which is now going to be a show, if we'd had the Obi-Wan movie as well, etc., then the Star Wars stories would start to take a different potential spot. I don't see them ever eclipsing original or prequel, just because they don't have that cohesiveness in the first place, as they're just spread out throughout the Star Wars galaxy and the timeline. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say there. R says, what do I think about Barriss Offee? Do I think she was planned to be a bad guy since the beginning, or does that feel out of her character for you? It felt out of character for me when I first saw it, to be sure. And I think part of that is that we just didn't get the in-between pieces that showed her getting there. So if we had gotten those in-between pieces, just in the background of an episode here or there, her coming some problem with the Jedi and what they were doing, or a problem with the war, I think that would have helped immensely. And that, I think, is what was needed. The biggest problem with the arc in terms of... Now, bear in mind, I love the arc. The biggest problem in terms of that arc, in terms of who the bad guy was and the whole reveal, is you just didn't have much of anybody else to look at to choose. Hey, look, Barriss just randomly popped up again, and... we don't really have much of anybody else new in here to go ahead and potentially reveal as being the bad guy. And that can be a problem a lot of things run into. So they needed someone, and they wanted it to be someone we knew, and I don't feel like from early on it was planned, but maybe it was, and maybe we just didn't get... Maybe it got cut for a time, and we would have had Barriss have a little more arc in the background of some episodes, just with some comments here or there. I think that's all that was needed in order to bring that connection. I was still sad. I liked Barriss as a character, and I wish we'd gotten to see more of her over the course of things. Heck, her view of the Jedi and being on that side, potentially not even manipulated by Palpatine, potentially, as that seems an open question as to whether Palpatine had any hand in it at all. But that could have been interesting to have gotten that point of view. Just like we got to go off to the point of view of some of the villains sometimes, whether it was Maul or Ventress, etc. It could have been an interesting point of view to see her point of view, to see Barriss's point of view as somebody who was getting disillusioned. Slowly disillusioned, rather than Ahsoka who got disillusioned all of a sudden. And then we didn't really see much after that. But yeah, I think that's what I'd comment there on Barriss. Who are my top 10, or if I can only think of, or if I can't think of 10, 5 clones. Whew. I don't know if I can name 10 off the top of my head. I mean, heck, Vaughn's name is in my head recently, so I could try to get to 10 using that, but I don't really know Vaughn well anyway, because I don't think he popped up, really? I mean, I'm sure he was in the background and other things, but if we're going to talk top clones, well, then I'm probably going to have to put 5. 5s is probably my number 1 on the top clones. Yeah. 5s will go up number 1. Then I'll toss in Rex. Then... where will we go after that? Speaking of characters that didn't get rounded out as much as I like, I wish we'd gotten to know more of Cody. Being that Cody pops into the movies in the way he does, I wish we'd gotten to know him a little bit better than we did in the show. So Cody's probably a little lower. I think I'll put Echo next. Let's go 5's Rex. No, let's go Jesse. 5's Rex, Jesse, Echo. I think I'll go with those 4 first. Oh, we also have the Bad Batch clones, I guess, too, when I'm talking about clones. So yeah, I could probably name 10. I can't think of our medic's name right now. Otherwise, I might toss him in there. And then Tup was the one in the 5's arc who went. And I could name all 4 of the Bad Batch clones if I wanted to. Although, again, we don't know them well enough. But if I'm having to name 10, they might pop into it. And... yeah, the clone who was off on that other planet who had the family, I'd toss him in there. Let's see, I do believe they didn't put much Cody in the show because they didn't want to make his Order 66 scene even worse. Which I don't get, but I've heard somewhere this. I could see that as a possibility. If that's the reason, I'd be sad about that. But it wouldn't be the first time we've seen, a show or a movie or whatever. Well, you've got to make the good guys good in every case. They can't have this impurity and this negative side to them. Or we've got to later justify that, what they did was actually, it wasn't a bad thing. I don't know if the Clone Wars did a lot of that kind of negative issue. Where would I rank Commander Fox? Well, how much do we really know Commander Fox? Yes, Commander Fox is the one who shot and killed 5s. But short of that, I don't know that I know Commander Fox that well. And maybe I'm just not thinking of a number of moments that we actually got to know him. So, Overall, he's another person. I mean, that's something that on a rewatch of Clone Wars, I think one of the things I would definitely catch more is some of those clones and the individual ones over the course of it. Somewhere in the millions. Hey, a good soldier follows orders. So therefore, Fox was just a good soldier. Yeah, hello. Yeah. Hard case, heavy, yeah. Hard case was cool. It was sad seeing hard case go down. Heavy, we didn't get to know well enough, but heavy would probably, well, heavy might be in my top 10 as well. I mean, if we're looking at that, so what did we have? We've got fives, Rex. It's an Echo and Cody, and the 4 of Bad Batch, and yeah, I can. Maybe he would make it over there into that. Let's see. Oh, talking about Fox there. Doesn't have that many scenes. I think he's in the Clone Wars movie. Hey, what is he? See, this is back to a second watch. I would catch a lot more in there than I did this time around. Just because on a first viewing, also the clones blend together more for you. And I think especially at the beginning, you're not looking for the clones to be as major of characters as they are. I think certainly in my head. Even with that one episode that was a clone-focused episode that I saw early on because of the chronological order, even then. So I think I would catch a lot more of the individual clones on a second view, and I think I would gain a lot from that. And then only in Season 5, Ahsoka's Arc, and then Season 6, yeah. How can we follow orders when we know they are wrong? Yes. But again, I personally don't mind them that much. As you said, good soldiers follow orders. Yeah, so the clones are bred to do and what they're bred to be, right? Which is not easy to go against that kind of programming, yeah. Kix, right. Cut Up who was eaten by a worm. Cut Up who was eaten by a worm. Oh man, I am trying to place this here. Rest in peace, Cut Up and Droid Bait. Okay, I just have to do a quick look. Let's see. Cut Up. Oh, okay. Cut Up in 5's in the barracks back over there. Eaten by a worm. Why am I not placing that right? Oh, right. And Rookies, of course. Right. Okay, I got it now. I was missing that one, but yeah. So many clones that were just red shirts and just cannon fodder to be killed at one point or another, right? Definitely. Also, 99 definitely was one of the best. Yes. Who doesn't like 99? As I said, he was never a character that I feel you had a whole lot of range to expand on. But for what he was in there for, I mean, he did really well. Enjoyed 99. I'm going to jump off. Let's see what other ideas. They had a couple other things they mentioned over here in this Wikipedia article on other things they were going to do. Apparently, yeah, there were plans to bring the Zelo Beast back in the 7th season. I'm not exactly sad they didn't, although maybe they could have done a good job with it. Who knows? By the time Season 7 rolled around, they were writing better, too. There were plans to feature Barriss Offee following her deception in the 5th season finale. Ooh, that would have been cool. That would have been really interesting to see Barriss brought back after that. And also, where the heck he would go with Barriss. I mean, did she survive Order 66? Did she not? I have no idea if that's touched on. Maybe that's touched on in Rebels or books or comics or something else. I have no idea if it is. And not looking at that yet because it could be. But Oh, I'd love to have seen more of her after that, because then we could really dig into those conflicts and those issues too, right? And then apparently Aura Singh was meant to be featured in several unfinished episodes for the original sixth season, including one in which she would have been killed and one in which Jamie King's husband Kyle Newman was going to have a role. A member of the Tung species. Huh. Or seeing over the course of the show, she never. It's certainly a nice expansion from what very, very little we saw of her in the movies before that, of course. But Aura Singh never really shone during the course of this. There were some moments, but maybe if we'd gotten some of that later stuff, she wouldn't have gotten her chance to shine. Maybe that would have happened. Especially if we're talking later stuff. That gives a better chance of it. I think getting to see some more of her and Boba's interactions, I think, might have been a really nice way to go, and we never got to see that. But that could have been fun, maybe as a flashback episode, or who knows. Something like that. Let's see, what else do we got over back in the chat? I'll jump back over there for a second. Friend had Commander Gree as his favorite. Commander Gree. Which one is Gree? Also, when we're talking clones, some of the Wolf Pack would potentially go there, but I couldn't name them. I'll tell you that. I'm never good with names in the first place, let's be quite frank, and having only seen this once and not dug in deeper on some of these things would not make my life easier right there. So which one was Commander Gree? Let's see. Oh wow, he was way back in that one where they were escorting Newt Gunray back in season 1. Yo, way back. Green on the armor with the... I can remember the two hair things going on Gree. I recall that anyway. Interesting. So he was one of the people that actually tried to go ahead and kill Yoda. Yeah, that didn't work well. Let's see. Would love to learn more about Chris, who was the only blonde clone we ever saw. He was the one in the episode where Rex got wounded and Obi-Wan... yeah. Yep. Yeah, agreed. It's also weird to kill Aura Singh in a throwaway line in Solo. Yeah, I won't disagree with you there. Probably based partly on, I guess, that comment that she would have died and they had something written, so they were just trying to reference back to something that they hadn't actually gotten to make, so that way they were making it canon, I guess. But it still is weird considering it didn't get made. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was just looking at. Yeah, Gree was one of the ones beheaded by Yoda. Yeah. You said too close to kill Yoda. That's going to work well. Also, you seem to wait till after you've been Order 66ing some of the other Jedi. I might have Order 66 Yoda a little quicker right there, so he was higher up on the line. Yeah. So yeah, no, tons of cool clones, so many more that we could get more information on. And I'm curious also, because we're going to get the Bad Batch series, what other clones we might have pop back in and who else might pop in. Also, if they are going to bring that Kashyyyk arc into it, then that means it'll actually at least have part of its time happen before Order 66, which means we could get all kinds of crossovers and characters brought back in. So there's a lot of interesting potential, I think, in the Bad Batch arc to be able to continue, which feels more like it could be the true successor to Clone Wars. I don't know Rebels, of course, but obviously Rebels takes place, 15 years later? Something like that. And so Bad Batch, following directly a set of clones, which is what Clone Wars does anyway, the idea is about the clones, even if we watch a lot of other people too. So it feels in some ways like that show has the potential to be the true successor. Although, of course, we're watching clones that are much less clone-ish because they're much more individuals. And I can see why you do that. But I'm excited for that, considering I like the Bad Batch and what I saw in here. I like the potential of what we might be able to expand upon. I like the idea of getting to see the clones after the Clone Wars and having to deal with that and what the heck you do. Especially as I said, the Bad Batch apparently will become mercenaries, so they're not going to be somehow part of the Empire directly. So I think that'll be quite intriguing. So I'm intrigued to see that when it starts up, which I think will hopefully be airing next year sometime. We'll see, we'll see. So definitely looking forward to that. Dram Sim. Okay, I should have left an hour ago. My friends are expecting me. Have a fun stream. I'll watch tomorrow. May the force be with you. Well, and with you as well. Yeah, yeah. Well, we actually went a little while. I was a little worried at the beginning because we only had a few people in. But yeah, we've gotten to talk about a good few things. Talked about the unfinished episodes here briefly, too. Barriss might appear in Bad Batch. Also, Rex and Ahsoka definitely will. Yeah, yeah. That would be an interesting way. It almost seems like a chance to bring in some of the arcs that were unfinished in Clone Wars, and you can revive them through Bad Batch. Like, that could be a way of bringing whatever their idea was for Barriss back in, so that would be cool. And Rex, yeah, I couldn't imagine Rex not somehow hopping into Bad Batch. And Ahsoka, for that matter, just having the connection she does makes sense. Definitely, definitely. Okay. So, anybody else got some questions? Toss them in if you do. I'll probably finish this up in, shortly-ish, if not. So we'll see if anybody else has anything, and we'll do a little more Q&A if not. I think I've tossed out some of my bigger opinions on Clone Wars at this point, and I'll even touch on all the unfinished stuff. So I don't have a lot more to talk about at this moment. Certainly, I'll have that Crystal Crisis episode arc in a week, and that'll be there, but that's not something I can talk about right now because I don't know it. What about any of you? Do any of you is there any character I have not talked about from Clone Wars here that you'd love to hear me just talk about quickly? Some minor character maybe that I haven't touched on. Or a major character even. While I wait and see if anybody does, one other character... So Kit Fisto did get expanded on here in the Clone Wars, and I liked that. I still wish we got to see a lot more of Kit Fisto, though. It's like... just of the Jedi, I love Kit Fisto. Don't know why, even though we've never gotten to see that much of him. Let's see. I wonder if Echo will keep his blue theme armor. Echo. Will keep his blue theme armor, the one he had in Season 7 in Bad Batch, or if he'll switch to more red themed as the rest of the team. That's interesting. Interesting question. My guess is he'll keep the blue. I think they'll want more of that connection to draw back to Clone Wars and where we know Echo from best. So I think they're going to go ahead and keep the blue armor and probably not switch him to the red themed. Who knows? Maybe we'll actually vary up the rest of the team and make him a little more individual. For putting it, Captain Gregor, yes. Oh, so much you could do that would be fun right there. He should pop up into Bad Batch sometime. He's already outside of the main clones, so that would definitely feel like somebody we could see pop up in there. Somebody's a mercenary type. Yeah. I remember that was such a video game feeling sequence right there. It was fun. We could have one of those at least somewhere over in Bad Batch where we get to just have Gregor go do some more point of view action. I think we could have some fun with that. Yeah, no, Captain Gregor seemed pretty neat from the little tiny bit we got to know him. Was he only in one episode? I guess it is a minor character. There was only one episode, wasn't it? Yeah, we only had him in that one bit of the droid arc there. So he he would definitely count as one of the single episode minor characters that I liked and I'd like to see more of. Let's see. And just on that note, single episode characters I'd like to see more of. The Dougs. It would have been cool to see some more of the Dougs. We only ever really got that one episode, that first piece of the Zelo Beast one, and I wish we'd gotten to see a bit more of them over the course of it. It seemed an interesting potential conflict with the way they viewed things and the heritage aspects versus how they were changing their society. It seemed like there was definitely some stuff to dig into with the Dougs. But we didn't get to see it. Oh, the 100th episode of Clone Wars, to be exact. How was it? How intriguing. Gotcha. How many episodes were there in total? There is a question. I mean, if that was in the middle of season 5, and then the last couple seasons have 13, 12, 25. So it did not make 150, did it? No. Okay. Very nice. Let's see. Tigrovika. The last part of the Zelo Beast arc, where he wanted to be cloned. Exactly. That was my comment. It was clearly set up for another episode somewhere down the line. And we never got it. But, yeah, nevertheless, I'm not sure I'm sad about that just because I wasn't a fan of that arc anyway. But, if they placed it in season 6 or 7, maybe they would have done a good job of it. Satine. Don't know what to ask about her, but do I think she was handled well, or her death felt not that important after all? Well, I commented at the time in that was actually one of my major issues with that arc, is I don't think her death was handled well. Frankly, it felt like we had a story we wanted to tell. We needed to kill her to get her out of the way in order to tell it. That felt like far too much of the impetus of why we did what we did. And I felt like I would have been more okay with it if, let's say, we had gotten to see more of how it impacted Obi-Wan. And we never did. Some people had said at the time that, it'll pay off more later. Well, to be honest, I don't think it did. We had a little in this final arc of a reference, and that was nice. It was certainly nice to get that and see that sadness on Obi-Wan's face, which, to be honest, almost felt like more sadness than we saw anywhere else, which was weird, but I think it'd be more sad a little earlier, too. But, yeah, we just didn't get it, and, yeah, I was a little sad about that. Because it would have been, at least if we're going to kill Satine, it would have been a good opportunity to really dig into Obi-Wan. Heck, you could have even had him tempted a little more by things like revenge. And yes, Obi-Wan obviously would have rejected it because he is the exemplar Jedi Knight. But we just didn't really dig into it. And so she was kind of thrown away to get thrown away. At least that's what it felt like to me. And especially as she was such an interesting character earlier on when we had our big Mandalore 3-episode arc earlier on, that I was hoping for more out of her. And yeah, I was disappointed. The show never really liked to go too much into its political episodes and not have its action. And I think if it had been more willing to go into its more political episodes, maybe we would have gotten a little more Satine. Heck, we even got that tease that one time with the summit between both the Republic and the Separatists that was happening on Mandalore, with Satine, not ruling over it, but moderating, shall we say. And if we'd had more things like that, if we'd gotten to dig more into that, you would have had more time with Satine, and you would have gotten to see a little more of the political side of what's going on in the galaxy. And so there's some lost opportunities that I think they really could have gotten into. But hey, not the show it was ultimately when it came to things like that, even if they touched it sometimes. Okay. So yeah, no, I didn't talk about Satine. Yeah, so we're talking about some of my characters that were some of my favorites in here that were new characters in Clone Wars. Definitely she would be amongst that set. And numerous of the clones. Kazurt asked, who's my favorite clone? I definitely said it earlier, but I would definitely say Fives. Loved Fives. I'm sad to see Fives gone. In some ways, in fairness, I think we probably know Rex better than any of the other clones. But short of Rex, Fives probably is the clone we got to know the best over the course of the show. Just because we got to see him all the way back from things like Rookies and moving onward through that multi-episode arc and onward in here. So Rex, well, also we might have gotten to know him better. He didn't have as big a character arc. His point A and his point B were much more similar, whereas you go into somebody like Fives and he changes over the course of the show. And you have to with that final arc he gets now, don't you? Although, if Rex pops up here into our new one, into Bad Batch, then we definitely might get to go ahead and see a bit more of an arc for Rex, as I think he will have to have more of an arc and changing his character after having gotten free of the programming and having had himself get completely disillusioned with, well, the Republic that's now turned into the Empire. So I think you could have a really interesting arc with Rex. Anyway, so yes, Fives, definitely favorite clone, no question. And while talking characters that were just introduced in the course of the show, or at least ones we barely knew anyway, outside of it, Fives, a number of the other clones, people we just didn't know before. What about Bo-Katan? Why do I think they made her a hero at the end? I'm assuming she pops up in Rebels. I'm just assuming that's why she had to become a hero, because she's going to be a character we care about. I'm assuming that. Also, Bo-Katan felt like a replacement for Satine. So we killed off Satine, who was diplomatic, etc., and we replaced her with her sister, who is much more an action hero, and that's more what we're interested in and what we're looking for. So I feel like there was that as well involved in it. But I think I've heard of Bo-Katan potentially being involved in Rebels. I'm not sure if I'm right. I certainly know there were also rumors with Mandalorian Season 2, and that would unsurprisingly be related to exactly that fact. So I think that's probably where I caught a wind of that, but maybe she's not. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not going to look into it, so I don't want to know. I'll find out when I find out. But yeah, that's why you'd make her a hero, because she has to be good if we're going to care about her as a character now, right? Yep. And for what it's worth, by the way, Bo-Katan was an interesting character. I like her so far for what we saw. I don't feel like we got to know her as well as her sister. But yeah. Interesting another piece while we're talking about it. Satine's nephew, who I doubt is Bo-Katan's son, but that's somebody I'm curious if we'll revisit later. It feels like the kind of character that could come back later on, just so how we introduce them, but maybe not. I don't know. I'm not even sure if I care too much one way or another. Tiger Vika, I mean, Maul isn't, well, good, and I do care for him as a character. Agreed. I mean, heck, talk about Ventress, too, who I love as a character. But, yes, but at the same time, I think if they really want to use her as a character, they feel the need to do that. A lot of things do. So I'm not saying it's necessary by any means. Heck, don't take me, as saying that. Not my point. I'm just assuming that's why you went that direction with Bo-Katan. And even then, it's a temporary thing, so who knows if she really is a hero per se. Let's see. Okay. So I think I'm going to go ahead and probably wrap this up unless you guys have some more questions out there for me. Because we've been almost 2 hours here, and it seems like a good time to wrap this up. So if you got anything, toss it in the chat now, or, well, hold your peace until the next time we do a live stream at some point in time in the future, right? It won't be the last live stream, but it'll probably be a little bit till the next one. Probably say maybe a season 1 finale of Rebels or something like that. I don't know. Some people talked about potentially season finales for Rebels as being a good spot for that, and so that's what I'm thinking about right now. But hey, if you got anything else right now, let me know. And hey, always feel free to drop a comment or anything else, and I'll try to respond to it. Okay. So I don't see anything else popping up. Oh, wait. Yes, I do. About Rebels, in that show, a straight storyline and no arcs like in Clone Wars. Yeah, I heard that. Especially because I think that's where Clone Wars really got good. I'm sad to hear that there won't actually be big arcs in there. So, we'll see what we see. I'm glad I know that little bit going in, just because at least I don't have the expectation for it. Okay. And we'll definitely see each other another time. May the Force be with you as well, Tiger Vika. And how am I planning to do reviews then? Well, I only did the live stream for the final arc of Clone Wars here. Unless people are really wanting everything to be live streams. I mean, people can let me know if that is something they want. But otherwise, it's how I've been doing all of the arcs all the way through the course of Clone Wars. I intend to do that same kind of style for when I go into Rebels. So watch them put it up. It also means, hey, you get to have all the images, which is always nice too. Whereas I can't really show you all that if I'm live streaming. So there's an advantage to that for anybody who is curious to see it. But that said, if there are lots of people who really are loving the live stream format, let me know. I can always think about other options if there's like a whole ton of you that are really wanting that. So yeah. Okay. So with that, I am probably going to go ahead and say goodbye for now, and we will see each other again in more videos and in the next live stream whenever that ends up coming up. And heck, tomorrow, I think we get a new trailer for Mandalorian. I have heard, I'm not sure if it's really confirmed or just a rumor, but I've heard rumor that we get a second trailer for our season 2 of Mandalorian coming up, and hey, that'll be cool if that pops up. Maybe we'll actually see if Ahsoka is in there or other things like that. Anyway, with that being said, to everyone, I will see you next time around. Feel free to leave comments down below. In this case, the live chat should still be up, and hey, even if it's not, it's in the video itself, so everyone will be able to go ahead and see it after the fact, even if something weird happens to it. And so, let me say, have a magical day, and may the Force be with you, always.